The Ravens pre-draft press conference with Eric DeCosta and John Harbaugh just ended. This is known as the Liars Luncheon, so you can't believe everything you're hearing. But I wanted to come on here and talk about what stood out and what my takeaways were from this as we approach the draft next week. Let's get into it.
Ravens flock. The flock rundown is the place to be.
Motionless brainwaves attempt to swim their way to sense, can't tame the untamed.
What's up, Ravens fans? My name is Ryan, and welcome back to another episode of the Flock Rundown. So we just had the pre-draft press conference end, and not a ton of juicy questions. You know, I definitely feel like there were some softball questions thrown at Eric DeCosta and John Harbaugh, but what's new? If you've been around, this is kind of how this pre-draft press conference goes every year. They call it the Liars Luncheon because it's a competitive advantage to just not reveal any of your draft plans or roster plans whatsoever. And we kind of got a lot of that, but there were some main takeaways. They did touch on some topics that we got some answers to, so let's get into it. We're going to start with our Darius Washington because his deadline is in 3 days. The restricted free agent deadline is in 3 days. If he doesn't sign a contract in the next 3 days or an offer sheet from another team that the Ravens can match, by the way. So it's not like, even if he did sign a contract in the next 3 days with another team, the Ravens do have the option to match it. They just went with the first right of refusal so that if our Darius does end up going to that other team and the Ravens don't match it, they don't get a pick in return. But Eric DeCosta did say that he was confident that our Darius Washington would be back.
Well, I'm confident, fairly confident that our Darius will be back. I don't know that it affects our decision-making at the position at all. I think it's a pretty deep safety crew, and there's, obviously the top guys, but then there's maybe 4 or 5 or 6 guys that will probably be, third, fourth, fifth round guys that are good players. I mean, this is a really nice pool of players to pick from. I think we definitely will look at that. I think we added the 2 young guys last year. Both guys play well for us on special teams, Bo and Sanusi, but it's a good group of players this year, and again, a position I mentioned, corner. I would probably guess that of our 11 picks, at least one of those would be a safety.
They are still going to take a safety. He said, I bet you one of our 11 picks is a safety. It's still a need, and they're still not committing long-term to our Darius Washington. I don't think that they love him that much. If they did, they would have signed him to a contract extension. I really think that they want a true free safety. They're going to probably draft a true free safety. I don't know, if that guy's going to start this year or not. It probably depends on where that guy gets drafted. If we draft a first round one, then absolutely. But if we're drafting a safety in the 3rd, 4th round, don't expect them to play a lot this year. But it seems like they are trying to move forward with a free safety, a true back-end ball-hawking free safety that can then free Kyle up to be moved wherever see fit. And that probably is the best way to go about it, but it definitely seems like they're not committing to our Darius still. And I feel bad for our Darius because I feel like what else could he have done? I know he struggled with injuries a couple years ago. I know he's an undersized player. I'm not saying that he's a Pro Bowl elite safety in this league, but man, this guy plays like a Raven and makes plays out there. He saved a couple games. There's just so many plays, so many hits that our Darius made last year that I feel like the Ravens should commit to him. I mean, he's not going to be that expensive. You don't have to dish out 10 plus million. I think, this first right of refusal is like 3 million. So I definitely, don't really understand why they're not committing to him. I think he'd be a smart signing to even have as just a rotational safety, but it seems like long-term they're probably going to go in a different direction. Eric DeCosta was also asked about the 5th-year options of Tyler Linderbaum and Kyle Hamilton, but had 0 answer, said that he's not ready to make a decision on that, and will probably be announced near or at the deadline of the 5th-year option, which is May 1st. So coming up, in 3 weeks from now, he's going to have to announce who he picks the option up. And I made a whole video breaking down this decision in detail. And from my takeaway, just looking at the money, I think we're going to pick up the 5th-year option of Kyle Hamilton because it's going to be $18 million, which is less than the top safety. And Kyle Hamilton's most likely going to end up being the top paid safety in the NFL. I think he does reset the market. So it would be smart to just accept his 5th-year option and pay him less than top dollar right now until you get an extension done. But the Tyler Linderbaum one, the centers are grouped in with the entire offensive line pay. So it's the top 5 salaries of the offensive linemen in the entire NFL. And that puts Tyler Linderbaum's 5th-year option at $23 million. And the top paid center in the NFL is Creed Humphrey at $18 million. So most likely we don't pick up Tyler Linderbaum's 5th-year option, and we do pick up Kyle Hamilton. That's what I see from it. I don't see either of these guys leaving, so does it really matter at the end of the day? Probably not. But there is a decision that needs to be made by May 1st, and Eric DeCosta was not ready to comment on that today. They were also asked about trading Mark Andrews, and I thought it was interesting that Eric DeCosta was basically saying you never know what's going to happen, but we've never traded a player during the draft. And instantly my mind's like, yes, you have. You traded Hollywood. But he was also asked that during this, and he said, no, I had that trade done 4 days before the draft. We just agreed to not announce it during the draft. He said, I've never traded one of our own players during the draft. So doesn't mean that they can't get a Mark Andrews trade done a few days prior if he wants to. It doesn't mean that they can't trade him during the draft. He was non-committal. Once again, when asked about Mark Andrews, he was very complimentary of Mark, but saying you never know what's going to happen, and we're not against drafting a tight end either.
Oh, man. I never know what's going to happen, Jeff, and I would never want to say this or that, but I can tell you this. Mark Andrews is a warrior, and he's played his butt off for us, and his competitiveness, his talent, his attitude, his leadership is so valued here, and he's a great player, and I think we're in the business of keeping as many great players as we can. So there's always a lot of unpredictability with the draft. You just never know. I don't think we've traded many of our own players. I don't know, have we ever made a trade during the draft where we traded one of our players? Well, that wasn't during the draft. Well, I mean, I had done that trade before the draft. You guys didn't know about it.
The day before.
I did that on Monday, actually. The Monday of the draft.
He was also asked about the offensive line, which I think is the most important thing this offseason. I've been screaming that in every video almost. We need to build the trenches. I don't want to be satisfied with what we have. If Voorhees and Falele end up winning the job, that's awesome, but we need to add as much competition as possible, and Falele's a free agent after this year, so you got to be thinking about the future as well. And he was asked about the offensive line and had some interesting things to say.
I saw a stat the other day that I think we're allocating less salary cap this year to the offensive line than any other team in the league. And that tells me that we have some good young players who are playing well. They're on their rookie contracts. I've got a lot of faith in those guys. I've got a lot of faith in Coach Warhop to develop, and a lot of faith in our strength and conditioning program too, that we bring in these younger offensive linemen, and typically we see that they get better over time. I think it's a good, strong offensive line class this year across the board, a really, really good group of tackles and guards as well. And so, I think that anytime you have a chance to draft an offensive lineman that you think can be a really good player, you should do that, especially the way we play football, because we're a team that prides itself on running the ball and being physical, knocking people off the ball, controlling the clock, protecting the quarterback, all those different things. And so I think that's going to be critical.
It definitely seemed like they are not afraid to draft younger linemen and just develop them, because he was very complimentary of how they develop players, and also acknowledged that the Ravens have the least amount of salary cap allocated to their offensive line in the entire league, which I think is ridiculous, to be honest with you. I mean, credit to the coaches for being able to develop some younger offensive linemen. I'm not saying that's a bad thing by any means, but it does show a lack of investment to protecting Lamar and opening up running lanes for Derrick Henry. So I still want to stack this offensive line as much as possible, and I don't think Eric DeCosta by any means shied away from, we're going to draft some guys. We're going to draft some offensive linemen in this draft, hopefully early. Hopefully the competition's high. If we end up going with Voorhees and Falele, I'm fine with that. But we need to have strong competition this offseason, and the best man can win the job. Eric was also asked about the Derrick Henry extension, which has kind of gone quiet and is a lingering thing that I thought would have probably been done. I thought we could have easily cleared some cap and got Henry at least locked in another year from now. But he was not committal on that at all. He said he's talking to a bunch of guys. He's still thinking about signing other free agents post-draft that are still out there. And there are a lot of moving parts, basically, and was not committed to signing Derrick Henry at all. So I don't know if those negotiations went stale. Maybe the price went up a little bit when Saquon signed for $20+ million. Not that Derrick would get that, but Derrick's he made 8 last year, 10 this year. You know, if Saquon got 20, Derrick's like, hey, man, like maybe I want 14. You know, and Eric's not ready to commit to that. He probably would want to go in a cheaper direction. So I don't know how that's going to play out. I would love Derrick Henry to get an extension, not only just to keep him around for another year, but also to clear some salary cap in the short term. I think it, makes sense on all fronts. And I don't think Derrick Henry is about to be out of the league if his playing time needs to decrease a little bit because he is slowing down in a year or two. Then you could have a rotation of another guy come in, but it doesn't necessarily mean that Derrick Henry is not going to be useful in your offense. I don't really want to lose Derrick Henry. I think Derrick Henry, with his size, is going to be a problem in the NFL for as long as he wants to be, at least a couple more years. So I'm hoping this extension gets done. I definitely think he's one of those guys that you should keep around, but listening to what Eric DeCosta had to say about this, he definitely did not seem like we needed to get an extension done with Derrick Henry, which is the tone he had a few months ago. Another interesting point that was brought up is that we have 11 picks this year, and Eric DeCosta pointed out something that I made in the video yesterday, is that we don't have 11 picks worth of room on this roster. That is something that a lot of people aren't really talking about, is we almost can't draft 11 picks, or 4 or 5 of those guys aren't going to even be on the team. They're just going to be wasted. They're not going to stay, because even if you sign them to the practice squad, if they got some nice potential, another team that didn't have a lot of draft picks is going to sign them to their active roster. So what was the point of the pick? You got 4 6-rounders and 1 7th. So you got 5 draft picks between the 6th and 7th round. There's just not any roster space for those type of guys. I mean, I get having strong competition in camp, but they're not going to make the team. They're all not going to make the team. This roster is tight right as is right now, and then you're obviously going to have your early picks that are going to make the team, and we just don't have room for 11 guys. So he kind of spoke on this and admitted that too, which I thought was good, and said that picks are like currency, and we may, he likes having a lot of currency, but there's going to be some moving pieces, and we could always trade those picks either to move up or to even acquire more picks next year, or for a draft that we might not have 11 picks. And it's just nice to have the flexibility.
We feel good about our roster. It's going to be hard for 11 players to make the team out of the gates this year. I mean, if they do, it'd be incredible. History tells us that probably not all 11 picks are going to make the initial 53-man roster, which is a good problem to have. It means we're a talented team. So I like having 11 picks. I think it gives us a lot of flexibility in different ways. And, I think that our goal would be to have extra picks every single year, because it just gives us a chance to continually develop young players. And I think we do that as good as any team in the league.
And the last thing I wanted to touch on is kick returner, punt returner. Eric DeCosta was asked about this, and he said that we have some guys that can do it, which we know is our floor. So Tylan Wallace, maybe even a Zay Flowers. I don't really want to put Zay out there, but he has returned some punts. I would say Tylan Wallace is probably the main guy right now, because Deontay Hardy was our guy last year. He's still a free agent right now. We lost Steven Sims. So it's Tylan Wallace right now that's on the roster that is going to be our returner. And Eric DeCosta acknowledged that they're trying to get a guy that has a lot of high upside and is a threat out there on the field, and that they're going to be looking at this draft specifically to try and find one of those guys. So I love hearing that. Not a shot at Tylan, but we do know what the floor is. We know what Tylan brings, and outside of that Rams punt return touchdown, which is absolutely insane to win the game, Tylan's made some mistakes at punt returner, and hasn't been the fastest or quickest guy. He's not the most explosive threat back there. And I like Tylan. I like Tylan's role on this team, but I would love to go get, draft a receiver in this draft. Could be in the later rounds. Doesn't necessarily have to be early, and have that guy be an explosive punt returner, kick returner, so that we actually are a threat. Because I do think there's going to be more kick returns. They're moving the touchback to the 35-yard line. That is a massive change in the NFL rules. If you kick the ball in the end zone now, the team gets the ball all the way at the 35-yard line. That is not going to happen very often. There's going to be a lot more kick returns. The NFL is trying to force more kick returns, and the Ravens need to be forward thinking in that department, because we really haven't had an elite explosive returner in years, man. I know they brought in Deontay Hardy to be that. He struggled with injuries all last season and never was that. So the Ravens need to go find a guy that they can just stick back there at kick returner, punt returner. I know Keaton Mitchell can do some of that too, but I know that they're looking elsewhere by Eric DeCosta's comments of, we know what our floor is, but we're looking for something bigger. And I agree. I think we need to go get aggressive in finding a kick returner, punt returner, because that is going to be important. There are going to be a lot more kick returns this year than there was in the last few years, for sure. A lot of teams have just been kicking the ball in the end zone. I don't think that's going to happen very often if the other team's going to start at the 35-yard line. That's solid field position right out the gates. So they're going to try and drop that ball down to the 1-yard line and have somebody go return a kick. So the Ravens need to have somebody that can take some to the house. But those were my main takeaways from this. Definitely let me know what you guys were thinking. I know we didn't get a ton of specific information. We never do. That's why they call this the Liars Luncheon. Why would they reveal their plans a week away from the draft? But it's always nice to hear from Eric DeCosta and John Harbaugh. I think we can read between the lines and get some insight out of this. I wish some different questions were asked. They're probably not allowed to ask a lot of questions. I heard at the very end, Eric DeCosta called out Jerry and was like, hey, you've been quiet today. And he's like, you don't want my questions. And then they started laughing, and Harbaugh's like, you're probably right. They're probably not allowed, or, it's kind of frowned upon to ask some juicy questions. So I get it. I totally get that the reporters are hired by the team, and there's this protective bubble in a way of, not asking as much juicy questions that could get somebody clipped up or in trouble. But let me know what you guys are thinking after this. What were your takeaways? Appreciate you, as always, for tuning in to another episode of the Flock Rundown. Have a beautiful rest of your day, and I'll let the greatest linebacker in the history of the game take us out.
Ravens Flock. The Flock Rundown is the place to be. My man Ryan has been a lifelong Ravens fan since he was born. The Flock Rundown. Nothing gets better than waking up and wondering how high we can fly. Tune in.
Motionless brainwaves attempt to swim their way to sense, can't tame the untamed.